Hello, good afternoon again to our friends from the media. Welcome to our press conference for today. For this round of press conferences, we have a very special guest, Mr. Richard Parry. He is the head of Global Relations Division, Center for Tax Policy of the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development, or OECD. In this morning session, delegates discuss the issue of tax crime and international cooperation regarding tax-related matters. And our guest here will expound on the highlights of this morning session. And he can also share with us some of the developments in terms of cooperation among countries in relation to tax matters, some proposals to further enhance this cooperation, and perhaps he can also share with us the contributions of the Philippines and other economies in regards to this agenda. Mr. Parry?
Thank you very much. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, friends. It's great to have an opportunity to have a chat with you about what's been going on in the last 2 days. At really quite an important workshop, a very important workshop hosted by the Philippines on transparency with regard to fiscal issues. We've been talking this morning about 3 key areas with regard to transparency. The first is about the question of tax crimes and other financial crimes. The issue there is that key crimes to do with money laundering, with illicit financial flows, with regard to corruption generally, are not easy to tackle from the point of view of the government of any particular country, because they tend to take place in an area which no particular area of government is able to get at without working together. And what we talked about this morning was the opportunities for areas of government to work together to combat areas of tax fraud, financial irregularities, corruption, and so on. These areas are particularly costly to countries, and particularly to developing countries. And it's estimated that around 3.6% of global GDP is lost to illicit financial flows, to money leaving the country or leaving the particular area where it should be taxed and not being taxed at all through criminal activity. So on this area, we're talking about cooperation globally, but first of all, between agencies in any particular government, also between governments, and thirdly, by developing a capacity building program for officials to work on this area. The Philippines has been actively involved in this, in something called the Task Force on Tax Crime and Other Financial Crimes. It's been directly involved as a member on an equal footing with OECD countries and G20 countries. It's very much in favor of the work that's going on through our Global Academy on this particular issue, which is set in Italy. The Philippines took part in the most recent program in that academy in May this year. So that's a really key area. The open question is whether we may be setting up a regional academy on this issue, and that will be discussed in due course. The second area of importance is a global project called Dealing with Base Erosion and Profit Shifting, the BEPS project, as it's known. And the BEPS project is about ensuring that we deal with tax avoidance, that we deal with multinational enterprises who don't pay their share of tax where their profits are earned. This is a global project. It includes OECD and G20 countries. It's mandated by the G20 to produce solutions to these issues, which can be implemented by governments to produce the solutions later this year and for implementation to take place thereafter. The Philippines is directly involved. It's involved in the work of the Committee on Fiscal Affairs and its working parties at OECD, who are designing solutions to countering BEPS issues. It's been represented there by the Commissioner of Revenues in the Philippines, as well as by other officials from the Ministry of Finance. So it's a really important initiative. The Philippines is there on an equal footing discussing these issues on a global basis. And the result of this will be an implementation process which will take place in 2016 and future years. And the Philippines will be a key player in the process of implementation. The third element we talked about this morning is automatic exchange of information and exchange of information more generally. This is a critical area behind any activity countering tax evasion or avoidance on an international basis. We need information. And the theme of this event over the last couple of days was transparency. And this is about transparency with regard to the provision of information to governments so that governments can ensure the right amount of tax is paid. The right amount of tax is paid by all taxpayers, not just the small taxpayers, but by the big taxpayers as well. And that's a really important element to this process. So for automatic exchange of information, there is a global forum on transparency and exchange of information, which has a membership of 126 countries, of which the Philippines is a part. This global forum has set a standard on exchange of information automatically. And what exchange of information automatically means is that banks and other financial institutions will automatically provide information to their governments, which can then be provided to other governments under the right legal agreement, and there has to be a legal agreement to do this, and also under terms of strict confidentiality. And confidentiality is fundamentally important in this process. But the information will allow governments to risk assess, to decide whether there is a tax risk with regard to their particular taxpayers, large taxpayers in particular, and therefore whether that tax risk needs to begin an auditing process and so on. And if the auditing process is needed, then exchange of information will continue on request and further information will be asked by the taxpayer. So those are the three areas we were looking at this morning, all about transparency, dealing with tax crimes, dealing with evasion, money laundering, corruption, and those issues, dealing with international avoidance by large multinationals where they don't pay the right amount of tax in the territory where profits are earned, and dealing with automatic and exchange of information on request, which underpins that system, provides the basis for those things to take place. And I think I'll stop there and open the floor to questions.
Okay, we are now opening the floor to questions. Who wants to throw the first question? Okay, I think okay, please.
Good morning, sir. I'm Shane Velasco again from Philippine Information Agency. My question is, we all recognize that official development assistance is really vital in contributing the realization of our vital infrastructure projects. Now, my question is, what need to be done in order to fast-track project, in order to avoid delays on some project that was funded by the ODA? Because I think we all know that some of the project funded by the ODA are facing some delays. On your point of view, what are the strategies need to be done in order to fast-track the project, to push through the project without any delay? Because like for example, in Central Luzon, there's so many successful ODA project, but there's some project that facing delayed, particularly funded by ODA. So what are the strategies as far as transparency is concerned? Because yesterday we talked about that the so-called the beauty of transparency result on the delayed, but we need to fast track. So what are the strategies in order to? Thank you, sir.
Mr. Parry, so will you be comfortable addressing the issue of ODAs? Okay.
I'll say something briefly about it from the global experience of ODA. I'm not an expert with regard to the Philippines and how the Philippines projects work, so I can't comment on any specific projects, obviously. But what I would say is that one of the key areas with regard to ODA is the way in which ODA agreements are put together in the first place. To ensure that ODA actually reflects what countries need in a very specific way. That ODA projects are driven less by the donor and more by the recipient. And in order to avoid difficulties with regard to implementation of projects, it's important they be driven by the recipient rather than the donor itself. In that context, I think what I would say is what's also really important is an open process for procurement, and to ensure that there is a clear, open and transparent process for what will be done by the people who take the contracts based on the ODA that's provided. And in that, what's really important is a clear monitoring process so that stages are set to ensure that particular things are achieved at particular times, and that the project itself and the financing of that project is dependent on meeting stage goals. And I think as I say, I can't comment on particular projects, but I think it's really important that we tie in all of those elements, the needs of the country to start with, so that the recipient has a very clear idea of precisely not only what you want, but actually what's feasible. That's really critical, because delays come because not enough analysis has been done as to what's possible in the first place. That's one of the key factors behind delay. So we need to know what's feasible. We need to ensure that there is a public and open process for procurement, so we get the right people to do it, who are able to do it and who can meet the demands of the particular. And finally, we need a monitoring process and a staged process to ensure that the project itself meets its deliverables and it meets them at the right time, and that the dependent on that process happening. I hope that helps a little bit from broader experience.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Parry. To our friend from BIA, perhaps you can also ask your interesting question tomorrow when we have Mr. Roger van den Brink and another official from the Asian Development Bank, because ADB and the World Bank are two of the biggest ODA providers to the Philippines. Who wants to ask the next question? Okay, later ka. Ikaw muna.
Good morning, sir. J.M. Garcia from Philippine Information Agency also. So given that OECD is the expert in promoting economic change, and you understand a lot in environmental, social change, what drives them to strive to thrive, and they also set international standards on a wide range of things. So how do you think Philippines is currently faring compared to other ASEAN countries? And in a global point of view, what do you think are the strategies that the Philippines must do to continue its surge in growth economically? Thank you, sir.
Okay, that's a big question. I think in overall terms, as was said, the OECD encourages global reform. It's a reform-driven organization. The idea of it is to ensure that reforms take place in a wide variety of social, governance, and financial aspects. I think my own involvement is specifically with regard to tax and with regard to fiscal issues, so I'm best placed to comment on that. In that context, I think the Philippines has shown very significant signs of direct engagement and important engagement in the fiscal area. Now, the fiscal area is important because tax underpins everything else. At the end of the day, it is tax and it is a fiscal system, both in terms of collection of tax and a proper expenditure of tax, which underpins all social reform and also which underpins the health system, the education system, and so on. Unless you have the right policies and the right implementation, you're unable to deliver what you need with regard to social benefits. Now, the Philippines has taken big steps forward with regard to tax, both on terms of international tax avoidance and evasion, both in terms of strengthening the tax administration and its ability to work with taxpayers. And it's very important that the tax administration isn't there simply to extract money, but has a partnership with taxpayers, with business, and particularly with large business and institutions. The Philippines has done a lot in that area. The Philippines has also done a lot to achieve policies which work in favor of social development by having a sound fiscal strategy. With regard to growth, the question of growth is a big issue. How does one continue to achieve growth? This is one that every country asks, particularly given aging population and the scenario of an aging population, which is faced globally, but particularly by countries in this region whose populations are pretty healthy and likely to reach aging proportions. And the significance there is, what kind of policies do you need to ensure that that's the case? And here you need to make sure that you have a policy which encourages contributions to private pensions, for example. So that you have a pensions policy which takes into account from an early age the fact that the people who are currently working are liable to be on pensions for long periods of time thereafter. That's a key element of this. That you have a labour market strategy which includes and extends the period of time which people will remain part of the labour market, because of course people are getting older, and you want to make sure that they are not on pensions for that long a period of time, so you extend the retirement age. But at the same time, you need to have a labour market which brings in youth and which encourages youth to engage. And one of the areas of this is by broadening your labour market, it's also to increase the gender balance in the labour market so that more women are employed and there's a better life balance with regard to the labour market. All of these are key areas for growth. And the economy, of course, needs to be developed and organised along those kinds of principles. From what I can see, and I'm not a Philippines expert, but from what I can see, the Philippines policies in this area are good and clearly focused on the right issues. And I think the fact that they're hosting this event on transparency is very important, because it suggests the direction that the government is going in. Transparency is the key to all of this. As I just suggested in terms of ODA projects, transparency is fundamentally important. In terms of tax, it's fundamentally important. And I think in terms of social policy more generally. I hope that answers your question.
Okay, Amika.
Good afternoon, sir. Mika Flores of Business World. Sir, what do you think are the biggest constraints and limitations right now of tax authorities that hinder them from going after suspected tax evaders and money launderers? And what do you think should be done, or what reforms are needed in our existing legal frameworks that would provide more teeth for tax authorities in going after suspected tax evaders or money launderers or similar groups of people? Thank you.
Thank you. I think the key challenge for tax administrations globally, Philippines and everywhere else, in dealing with money launderers, in dealing with evaders, in dealing with corruption, is information. It's, first of all, having enough information to, first of all, be able to detect what is going on, to detect fraudsters, to detect criminals and in financial areas and in the tax areas. And that's the first question, is how to get that information. The second area is about how to deal with that information when we have it, what the legal basis are for actually ensuring that that information can be used to counter those kinds of activities. And the third is how to share that information among countries who can help you reinforce that, because all countries are engaged with other countries, and a large number of activities at a higher end of this particular scale of money laundering and tax evasion take place across borders. So you need to have ways of exchanging that information across borders. So what do you need? So first of all, you need legal mechanisms to allow for exchange of information. So you need to follow international standards on this to get those mechanisms in place. So what are the international standards? First of all, the international standards are around two things: exchange of information on request and automatic exchange of information. How this works is this. The rule in terms of exchange of information on request means that you can, as a government, your competent authority can ask another country to provide information, say on a particular taxpayer with an account in a bank. The other country's competent authority will provide that information, and you can use that in terms of your tax investigation to deal with possible evasion by that taxpayer. The automatic exchange of information significantly adds to that. What automatic exchange of information does is the exchange of information of taxpayers who may be tax residents in the Philippines by other countries with whom the Philippines has a legal agreement to exchange that information. So instead of having to know the name of that taxpayer and ask for request information, you get a bulk amount of information about Filipino tax residents, which can be used, therefore, by the tax authorities to establish what the risks are and whether they wish to audit. And you then have an exchange of information on request process to begin and to develop the auditing process. So the Philippines needs to be engaged in that process. You need, in other words, to have legislation in place which meets that global standard, which means the abolition of bank secrecy. That is a fundamental aspect to implementation of the standard. The G20 said in 2009, bank secrecy is dead. And indeed, bank secrecy is dying and is at the end of its life. In accordance with international standards, it is over. It's now a matter of countries implementing international standards. But if you do implement those standards, you can exchange information on the basis that I've suggested, and that will lead to a significant gain with regard to the legitimate tax charge in the Philippines. What that does is it provides the Philippines with the revenue and resources it needs to build its social program and to deal with issues. So you're not reliant on ODA for contracts, but you can actually develop these things yourself without being reliant on other countries to do so. So it's a very important basis to international development and growth, is to have a proper tax system. You need exchange of information for it. You need to abolish bank secrecy.
Any other question? Okay, follow up for Mika.
Sir, just a quick follow-up. Given that the country still has a bank secrecy law and it has not been abolished yet, or there has been no, efforts in Congress to have it repealed, how would you then now assess the level in which the Philippines can share information with other counterparts, given the local challenge that we are facing here in the Philippines?
Thanks. I don't know exactly what the bank secrecy law is here and what it looks like, so I'm not sure about the details of it. But what I would say in principle is that in order to exchange information in terms of international standards, and those international standards are not set by the G20 countries or the OECD and the G20 countries. They're set more broadly and monitored and implemented by the Global Forum on Transparency and Exchange of Information. That has 126 members, and the Global Forum peer reviews its membership to make sure that its members actually apply those standards. And of course, the Philippines is a member. So it is important for the Philippines to change its legislation on that issue in order to meet with its international obligations with regard to exchange of information. That's not to say that this isn't difficult. But it is to say that 10 years ago, a large number of countries had bank secrecy within their legislation. Indeed, some countries had it within their constitutions. A lot of those countries have changed based on the need to have a new international environment, an international environment based on transparency. And bank secrecy has disappeared in other countries. It is possible to do it. The political will is needed. Clearly, you can't have change without political will. And the political will, therefore, needs to be for the Philippines to engage in meeting international standards in that area.
Okay, we can entertain one or two more questions, if we still have some. Okay. Okay, Mr. Parry, I think for your closing, perhaps you can give your overall assessment of where we are right now, the global economy, in terms of international cooperation on tax matters, and where do we want to go, say, over the medium term?
Thanks. Yes, I think in terms of where the Philippines are, I'm very heartened by the efforts that have been made by the Philippines to engage in the global debate on tax and fiscal issues. I think the Philippines has taken a very progressive approach to this and is a leader in the region with regard to work in these areas. The work of the Revenue Administration, I think, has been particularly important in this. However, there are still obstacles to be overcome. The question of being able to exchange information and of bank secrecy is an important area. As I've suggested, the Philippines needs to be able to meet international standards on this basis. The Philippines is working both within the region and with OECD on all of the issues that I've just suggested. It's working as a partner with Australia, for example, on automatic exchange of information and how to implement those systems. That's an important engagement, which means the practicality of how automatic exchange can be done, and in particular how that can be used to increase and ensure that the right amount of tax is paid within the Philippines by Philippines tax residents, and therefore that on that basis that the economy can grow and development can take place. So my overall view is I'm optimistic. I'm very pleased with the way the Philippines is engaged in the international environment as well as within the region. I see every sign that will continue and that will be developed further, that some of the difficulties with regard to the Philippines' positions may be changed in the future, and we look forward to that, and we look forward to an open and transparent world in which the Philippines plays a key role. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Parry, and thank you to our friends from the media for your being here. We'll see you again this afternoon for around 4:30 or 5 for our next round of press conference. Thank you.